This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you guys to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, so you always get those alerts on your phone, on your laptop, however you may be listening, and you always know when we drop an episode, and again, you never miss one when we drop one. Also, make sure to follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We love to interact with you guys on all of those social media platforms, and we'd love to interact with you more as well. So make sure you follow us on all those platforms. Again, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Also, make sure to leave us a 5-star review in whatever podcast application you are listening to this on. We would really appreciate that as well. Again, I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy and they are healthy during these times. We have a fantastic show for you guys today. Later on in the show, I'm going to be giving you the X factors to the Lakers potentially securing a championship. Now, I've gone on this show recently and said I do not think the Lakers are a championship team anymore, given everything going on with Rondo, Avery Bradley, and how good some other teams are. But there is one X factor that could change that and swing the Lakers back into championship contention and maybe championship favorites, in my opinion. That's one X factor. I'll get into that later. I'm also going to be talking about the rookie quarterback class. I talked a lot about Joe Burrow, but how about Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, and Jordan Love, and even a little bit of Jalen Hurts as well. I want to talk about all those guys as well, and a little bit more on Joe Burrow later on in the show. Also, make sure to stick around for the end of the episode where I'm going to be giving you my way too early NFL award predictions. Now, last episode, I did my NBA updated award predictions. Let's go way too early NFL predictions. MVP, Offensive Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, all that good stuff. I'll be doing that at the end of the episode, so make sure you stick around for that. But we're going to start off today with some basketball and some news that came out today. The New York Knicks have hired a new head coach. Now, personally, I did not think this was going to happen so early in the NBA bubble. I personally would have thought that the Knicks were going to wait all the way till, really the end of the season, when all of these also assistant coaches for some of these teams could have been hired as well. But they actually ended up going with a veteran head coach who's coached at 2 destinations before this. He's the former Chicago Bull head coach, Minnesota Timberwolf head coach. Tom Thibodeau is now the new head coach of the New York Knicks. Now, there were some rumblings earlier in the week and even a couple weeks ago, that Tom Thibodeau was considered the favorite with the Knicks job. Now, of course, they've probably been able to talk to him the most, considering he is currently not coaching anywhere. I think some other names that they were talking about were the Dallas lead assistant, San Antonio's lead assistant, and also Jason Kidd as well, who I'll get into in a minute. Were all names that were talked about. Obviously, all of those guys are in the bubble currently coaching with their teams, while Tom Thibodeau is not. And there was also a report either yesterday or the day before that Tom Thibodeau and the Knicks came to a halt at contract negotiations and they weren't able to complete a deal, and Jason Kidd eventually became the favorite as well. And then about 24 hours later, Tom Thibodeau signs a 5-year contract with the New York Knicks. Now, it's funny because a lot of people were kind of joking the Knicks, thinking this wasn't the right pick. I want to go through the pros and cons of hiring Tom Thibodeau, because again, I want to say that this is a good hire. It wouldn't have been my choice, but again, I feel like the Knicks could have gotten a lot worse. It was clear to me, in my opinion, the Knicks needed to have a big splash at head coach. Because in order to change the narrative, in order to change the culture, you need to have guys that are going to attract names, free agents, get the fan base excited again. There were a couple of names that I thought the Knicks should really, really consider going after. Tom Thibodeau was one of them, by the way. Tom Thibodeau, I thought Mark Jackson, who is a current analyst, but he was the one coaching Golden State and has Knicks ties. I thought he would have been a really good pick. And Jason Kidd. Now, unless the Knicks could have, lured somebody else to leave, their current situation and come coach New York. That's unlikely. But I didn't think the Knicks should go hire somebody who has either never coached before, is a no-name, or like somebody's lead assistant. Well, that might show some promise. You needed a big name. Even a big name in college basketball, I could have seen the Knicks hiring, and I would have agreed with that as well. Because again, free agents are what's going to get New York better, quicker, versus building from within. But I'll get into why I think they're going to be building within for the next couple of years. Now, obviously, the Knicks and head coaches, and really anybody who's been with the New York Knicks over the past, let's say, decade, hasn't really had job stability. And I know that this is a 5-year contract, but what are the real odds that Tom Thibodeau is a coach of the New York Knicks for, 5 years? A lot of people were saying that this isn't the right hire, that Tom Thibodeau's only going to be there for about 2. I want to disagree and say that I think this is going to work. Not work as in championship, but work as in I do believe Tom Thibodeau is a good head coach. When he left the Minnesota Timberwolves, they got worse. When he left the Chicago Bulls, they got worse as well. So when you look at it, Tom Thibodeau, whenever he's coached those two teams, they've been at their absolute best. I don't know about absolute best for the Wolves, but definitely for the Chicago Bulls. Now, if you want to look at Tom Thibodeau, he spent 5 seasons as a Chicago Bull head coach, and he had a 64% winning percentage there. And in 3 seasons as the Minnesota Timberwolves head coach, he had a 48% winning percentage there. So overall, as a career, Tom Thibodeau is 352 and 246 as an NBA head coach with a winning percentage of just under 60, which is pretty good in my opinion. If you can win 60% of your games, again, he's got a proven track record here. Players know who he is. He's also got a lot of ties around other teams. There could be some former Tom Thibodeau players who want to play for him. I don't know how much that would be, not necessarily from those Chicago Bull days, more from like those, Minnesota Timberwolves days. Again, I think it's a very interesting signing, and I think I know the direction the Knicks want to go in. Now, the only thing that Tom Thibodeau doesn't scream for me is player development. He doesn't scream at like a player development coach as much as Mark Jackson or Jason Kidd. Mark Jackson and Jason Kidd, I think, are one of the best development head coaches, would be at least in the league. I think Mark Jackson is one of the reasons why Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson in Golden State developed into the players they were. And then once they added Steve Kerr, they took it to that next level, of course, Kevin Durant as well. And Jason Kidd, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and really a lot of young Milwaukee Bucks players have accredited their success to Jason Kidd when he was the head coach there as well. So I really do believe that Jason Kidd and Mark Jackson are really good head coaches of young talent, developing players to help them reach their full potential, which is one of the reasons why I thought that the Knicks should go in this direction, because again, the Knicks have been striking out on free agents recently. Recently, I mean the past 20 years, really. But especially recently I remember at the beginning of last season, Knicks fans were really hoping to get Kevin Durant, Zion Williamson, and Kyrie Irving, and ended up getting stuck with Taj Gibson, Julius Randle, and RJ Barrett. Which again, RJ Barrett's nice, but the other two pieces are not as much. Now, I thought they would go into a player development type situation, considering they're going to have another high draft pick. And I think they might have learned their lesson on striking out of free agents. And in order for the Knicks to get free agents, I think they have to be a proven, at least good playoff team in order to get people there. I don't think the appeal of going to New York while they're terrible and trying to save them and be the savior of the New York Knicks is appealing to a lot of free agents and a lot of people who want to maybe demand a trade, guys like Oladipo, guys like Beal. Again, I think they should have gone into a player development type role. I would have picked Jason Kidd, and then Mark Jackson, and Tom Thibodeau would have been third on this list. But again, just because he's third on my list doesn't mean this is necessarily a bad hire. This to me screams that the New York Knicks want to make a splash, and they want to make a splash quickly. Now, it's no secret that Tom Thibodeau, as soon as he's hired, yesterday there's also reports that the Knicks are really interested in Zach LaVine of the Chicago Bulls. Now, Zach LaVine never played for the Chicago Bulls when Tom Thibodeau was there. I do not believe. He might have played for the Minnesota Timberwolves when he was there, though. I have to look at that. Obviously, Zach LaVine, just like Tom Thibodeau, is a former Minnesota Timberwolf and now a Chicago Bull. Now, it would be interesting to see if there's a connection still there. If I remember correctly, Tom Thibodeau was the head coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it was after his first season in which they traded Jimmy Butler for Zach LaVine, because I believe that was almost 3 years ago now, which makes me believe in Tom Thibodeau's second year, correct me if I'm wrong, that is when Zach LaVine left. So I believe he at least coached Zach LaVine for 1 season there in Minnesota. Now, is there a connection still there? Potentially. Did Zach LaVine like playing for Tom Thibodeau? Those are questions as well. But Zach LaVine is a very interesting piece, a piece I haven't talked about in a long time, or really ever on this show. When it came to me, when I thought players who would want out and players who could be potentially leaving extremely soon, their small market teams or their bad teams, to another team, the first two that came to mind were Bradley Beal and Victor Oladipo. But again, Zach LaVine is a really interesting conversation as well, because we know his discomfort with Jim Boylen, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls. Now, would he be willing to leave Chicago after he's had a phenomenal career there so far? He is the face of the Chicago Bulls right now. He is a really good player. Would the Bulls management be more willing to maybe get rid of Jim Boylen and bring somebody else in order to retain Zach LaVine? Or do they like Boylen that much? Again, Zach LaVine this year averaging 25 points a game. Freaking phenomenal. He's incredible. He's only 24 years old. Again, he hasn't even reached his prime yet. He would be a perfect way and more realistic option for the New York Knicks, in my opinion. Because I think Victor Oladipo has stated before, if he is going to leave, he would like to go to a team that's a more clear-cut contender if he leaves Indiana. Again, there's more reports about that came out recently as well. Teams that have been interested are like the Heat, the Nuggets, some other teams as well who are in that playoff spot. And Victor Oladipo is a lot older as well. Bradley Beal's an interesting situation because he's younger than Oladipo. He's closer to Zach LaVine in age, and I think he's the best player out of the three, out of LaVine, Beal, and Oladipo. And there's no question the Knicks are going to be all over him if Beal would like out of Washington. But again, it's unclear if Beal wants out of Washington. And if Beal wanted out, how willing is Washington willing to trade him for young pieces? And again, there's been some ties with the Miami Heat, some other teams as well, not necessarily the Knicks. Zach LaVine, on the other hand, makes a lot of sense for the New York Knicks. He is not a frontless superstar just yet. He is not, one of those guys that's talked about on ESPN constantly or Fox Sports 1 all the time. He is not one of these faces of the league, and while he's a phenomenal player for the Chicago Bulls, at all, he is a three-dimensional scorer, gets to the rack, uber athletic, can also shoot the three. He's fantastic. He isn't necessarily on the same trajectory as some of these other Bull players. The Bull team is really young right now. Lauri Markkanen also looks like he potentially wants out, but starting really with Kobe White is really the direction and the future of the Chicago Bulls franchise, along with Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine's already almost 25, looking to get paid probably soon. The New York Knicks would be a great match for Zach LaVine if he would want to play there. Again, not an A-list star, wouldn't cost as much as a Bradley Beal, and he would maybe want to play there more so than a Beal or an Oladipo, and it'd be a lot of interest in. And plus, there's that Tom Thibodeau connection as well. Not to mention that Thibodeau obviously has connections with the Chicago Bulls front office, the Chicago Bulls franchise as a whole, that ownership. Maybe there's some friendliness there as well. Again, Tom Thibodeau is not the general manager of the New York Knicks like he was with Minnesota, and I think that plays a big factor as well. I like Tom Thibodeau way, way, way more as just a pure head coach than a head coach and a GM like he was in Minnesota. I think he overstepped his boundaries there in Minnesota when he did that. But again, Tom Thibodeau is a tough, physical head coach, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if the New York Knicks are trying to adopt an old school of basketball mentality, much similar to when the Knicks last had success in the late or in the 90s, with Patrick Ewing. Tough, hard-nosed, physical basketball, aggressive, loud, yelling. That's a lot of what Tom Thibodeau is. Now, Tom Thibodeau hasn't always had success doing that route, but he has also developed some players, and some players have come out of that, such as Jimmy Butler, who is a proud Tom Thibodeau supporter, and until recently. I mean, when he left Minnesota, a lot of people wanted to blame Thibodeau, but in interviews with Jimmy Butler, he talked about how it was more Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, the work ethic, versus Thibodeau, because again, Butler played under Thibodeau in Chicago and Minnesota. So if you want to adopt that Jimmy Butler, Tom Thibodeau tough physical mentality, I could see why the New York Knicks would be really interested in doing that, bringing back that old school mentality, trying to be a physical team. I just think that it's going to be hard because, again, I think Tom Thibodeau is a coach that needs players implemented. He's never been a player development head coach. When he got to Minnesota, they already had Karl Anthony Towns. Andrew Wiggins did not develop under Tom Thibodeau. And again, they moved on from Zach LaVine to get a guy like Jimmy Butler, who was a veteran, which was the right trade, obviously, not in the long run, but in the short run. But again, he's not a player development guy. He wants to win, and he wants to win now. Has his mentality changed now with the New York Knicks? Are they going to want to develop guys like RJ Barrett, some other things like that? Or would the Knicks be willing to trade their very high draft pick for a guy potentially like Zach LaVine? That is a really interesting thought to me. That pick is going to be in the top 5, potentially top 3, maybe even the number 1, depending on how the lottery goes. The Chicago Bulls could go into a full-fledged rebuild situation. There is a new general manager there. Who knows what Jim Boylen's going to be as a head coach, if he's going to remain there for the future or not. And if he does, maybe Zach LaVine wants out. And if I were the New York Knicks in this specific draft class, I would definitely trade that top pick for Zach LaVine. I would definitely trade it for Bradley Beal. I would also trade it for Zach LaVine as well. Again, get yourself a face of the franchise. Play him next to RJ Barrett. Get a point guard as well at some point. Again, in this draft, it's such a question mark draft. I like guys like Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman a lot, Cole Anthony, LaMelo Ball. There's a lot of other players as well. There's not as many surefire, 100% bona fide NBA superstars in this draft like there have been in the past, guys with like Zion Williamson as well. Now, this draft class is definitely going to produce some good players, probably some all-stars as well, and who knows, maybe a Hall of Famer. But it's not as a star-studded draft class as they have been in years past. So if you're going to trade a top pick, this would probably be the year to do it. Now, if you could get Zach LaVine, you'd have a lineup of whoever you want at point guard. Zach LaVine at the 2, RJ at the 3, Julius Randle at the 4, Mitchell Robinson at the 5. Now, Zach LaVine would provide you that outside shooting as well as physical. I wouldn't love the floor spacing there. But again, Tom Thibodeau's never been a spacing guy. He's, again, very hard, physical, paint-type basketball. Get in the paint, get around the rim. Screw analytics. He's more man-analytics than analytics, thing like that. That would be a very Tom Thibodeau-esque team if you could get a Zach LaVine, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, and hopefully some shooting at the point guard position. I would actually like that team a lot. Would they make the playoffs? Who knows? But I think that would be a step forward in the right direction. Now, Tom Thibodeau also as a big name could attract some potential free agents. Now, I mentioned on the show before how I would say the New York Knicks would be hiring Jason Kidd because of how good of a developmental head coach he was. And then he's also got a really strong tie to Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. And then again, if, Jason Kidd could develop the Knicks, get them to a first-round playoff series, then bring in Giannis in 2021. That is how you say the New York Knicks. That's how I thought they should have gone about it. Instead, they go with Tom Thibodeau, a more proven head coach. Tom Thibodeau definitely has a better winning percentage and better record than Jason Kidd as a head coach, so I understand where they come from there. But again, I really do believe this is about the mentality and a big splash aspect for New York. They want to play hard-nosed basketball, it looks like to me. They've been getting clowned over the past couple years, especially that day KD and Kyrie decided to go with the Nets over the Knicks. If they can be a hard physical team and if Tom Thibodeau can be a better player development head coach or maybe surround himself with a staff that prides itself on player development, that would be better for guys like RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, some other young guys as well. Maybe they use that pick as well. But again, Zach LaVine is a name to watch. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Tom Thibodeau hire. Again, I like it. Not my pick. Would have gone with a Jason Kidd or Mark Jackson, but I totally understand where the Knicks are coming from. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad move. I think Tom Thibodeau is a good coach and could work with the New York Knicks. I just would have gone with more of a player development type guy. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side of it, we're going to be getting into the Los Angeles Lakers. 2 scrimmage games now have happened with the Lakers. We've seen them on the court. Graybeard, LeBron James, Anthony Davis. We've seen Waiters and J.R. Smith in action. I've labeled them as a non-championship team, and I'm sticking with that. But there is an X factor who could save this Los Angeles Lakers season, and it's not LeBron James or Anthony Davis. There is another player on this team that, if he steps up, could be a massive X factor and maybe put the Lakers back into that elite tier with teams like the Clippers and maybe beat the Clippers in a 7-game series. We're going to get into all of that right after this break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Again, I'm Alex Masser. I am your host. I just finished talking about the Tom Thibodeau signing of the New York Knicks and my thoughts on it. Again, I think it was a good hire, not the greatest hire. I would have hired maybe a Jason Kidd or Mark Jackson instead, but I totally understand where the Knicks are coming from, and I don't think they completely screwed this up. I don't think it was a bad hiring, just wouldn't have been my pick. Now, I want to transition to the Los Angeles Lakers. Early on when I started doing the show, I really did believe this was the Lakers' year to win a championship. I really did believe the stars were aligning for LeBron to get another championship, bring himself back to the top of the NBA world, as well as the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, after some more thought and some research, a couple days ago, or a couple really weeks ago, I kind of decided the Los Angeles Lakers are not a championship team as currently constructed. After Rajon Rondo and Avery Bradley, their two best defensive guards and two best perimeter defenders, were out. Avery Bradley decided not to play in the bubble for family reasons, and obviously Rajon Rondo had a broken bone in his hand. Now, they replaced them with Dion Waiters and J.R. Smith, who I've talked about at length on this show. I don't think is a great replacement. And I believe that the Clippers are going to be the NBA champions this year. And I really do believe that. And I still believe that right now. But there is a way for that to change and for the Lakers to prove me wrong and actually win the NBA championship. Besides LeBron James and Anthony Davis being phenomenal. Because we know that's going to happen. We know LeBron is going to be great in the playoffs. And we know Anthony Davis is going to be great in the playoffs. And even if this X Factor doesn't step up, I do believe the Los Angeles Lakers will go to the conference finals this year. I just don't think they'll beat the Clippers in a 7-game series if they're there. It's really... I do believe the Lakers are technically a championship contender. I just don't believe they can beat the Clippers right now, who I believe they're eventually going to meet up with in the Western Conference Finals. Now, that X Factor, if he steps up and does what he showed today in the scrimmage consistently, that could change everything, and the Lakers could be right up there with the Los Angeles Clippers and potentially beat the Clippers in a 7-game series. That player is Kyle Kuzma. Now, Kyle Kuzma has been deemed this X Factor ever since the beginning of this LeBron James-Anthony Davis partnership, and he is one of the most inconsistent players in the NBA. Some nights he's phenomenal, some nights he's terrible, and he's already shown that in the scrimmage games. He was terrible in the first scrimmage, I believe, against the Dallas Mavericks. Today against the Magic, I believe he had 25 points. Now that is an important thing. Not only that, he was phenomenal from three. I'll give you his stats right now. Kyle Kuzma tonight against the Magic in the scrimmage game, after having a terrible first scrimmage game against the Dallas Mavericks. Today against the Magic had 25 points, 7 rebounds, was super efficient, 10 of 13 from the field, and 5 of 7 from 3-point range. Now, Kyle Kuzma does not have to do that every single night in order for the Lakers to win the championship. What does Kyle Kuzma need to do? I need to see Kyle Kuzma get at least 17 to 20 points a game every single night. I'd rather have that Kyle Kuzma than a Kyle Kuzma who's going to give me 6 points on terrible efficiency and 25 points the next night on great efficiency. I'd rather have a consistent Kyle Kuzma with this specific Lakers team. He needs to really command the bench unit. He's obviously not starting, nor should he start. But I really do believe if Kyle Kuzma can be that sixth man for the Los Angeles Lakers, especially in a 7-game series when the Los Angeles Clippers are going to get a ton of scoring from their bench. Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, other guys as well are going to light it up off the bench for the Los Angeles Clippers. But if Kyle Kuzma doesn't have to match what Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell are going to do, can he keep them in the game? Can Kyle Kuzma keep them in the game when the two bench units are on, again, against the Clippers and Lakers, in order for LeBron James and Anthony Davis to get back into the game and not have to come back from a huge deficit? Things like that are important. Or for LeBron James and Anthony Davis to not have to play the entire game in order for the Lakers to have a chance. Important things like that. Again, I really do believe Kyle Kuzma is the X factor of this Los Angeles Lakers team. It's going to be really interesting to watch. He's a good player, not a great one. It's really interesting with him because if you remember, when they were moving on from their really young core, moving in the direction of getting LeBron James help, guys like Anthony Davis, they decided to prioritize keeping Kyle Kuzma and moving on from guys like Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart. Now, backtrack, I really do believe, I think Lonzo Ball, I think this is a really interesting discussion. I'll continue on with this. Did the Lakers send over the right trade package for Anthony Davis? Let's get into that. I just came up with this. Because they really wanted to hang on to Kyle Kuzma and had no problem giving Lonzo Ball away. Because if you remember, the reports were that, a trade didn't get done sooner because the Pelicans were really stingy and really wanted Kyle Kuzma. And there are reports I'm looking at right now from articles written months ago, obviously when the Anthony Davis trade happened, were that the Lakers could have kept Lonzo Ball if they gave up Kyle Kuzma. Who would have been better for this team, Lonzo Ball or Kyle Kuzma? And I hate to side with LeVar Ball here, but I think LeVar Ball would have been right. I really do believe Lonzo would have been better for this team. Because here's the thing. Right now the Lakers need perimeter defense. Lonzo Ball is a phenomenal perimeter defender. He's an improved three-point shooter, and even just as a serviceable 3 and D guy who's also a great passer, I would have kept Lonzo Ball over Kyle Kuzma, I think, on this team. Because again, Kyle Kuzma is a repetitive position on this team. There's already so many forwards for the Los Angeles Lakers. They don't need forward help, they need guard help. LeBron James isn't a guard, he's playing point guard obviously, but on top of that you have Kuzma, take away Kuzma, you have Anthony Davis, JaVale McGee, LeBron James. 3 really good forwards. Dwight Howard is also a center. So forwards and centers, big men, let's consider that. You already have 4 there who are really good. Where does Kyle Kuzma fit into that? That's the thing. That's why he comes off the bench again. He's not the greatest ball handler either. Now imagine if you take Kyle Kuzma out of the equation for this Los Angeles Lakers team and you replace him with somebody like Lonzo Ball. Let's say the Lakers were coming out with this starting lineup tomorrow against the Los Angeles Clippers in a 7-game series. Lonzo Ball, J.R. Smith, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, JaVale McGee / Dwight Howard. Would you give that a better chance in a lineup that goes out there with Quentin Cook / Caruso, J.R. Smith, LeBron James, J.R. Smith, Dion Waiters, Anthony Davis, JaVale McGee. Like, that's a big difference for me. I think if I could go back in time, if Rob Pelinka could go back in time, I would have kept Lonzo Ball. I think he would have been really good on this team. But again, Kyle Kuzma is the X factor to this team. If he can consistently be a really good player off the bench, provide that scoring spark. I don't need Kyle Kuzma to be what he wants to be. Kyle Kuzma wants to be LeBron James. He wants to ball handle, drive to the basket, be a Superman, be everything, get 25 points a game, get all the shots. That's not what Kyle Kuzma is going to be for really anybody, but it's definitely not for this Lakers team. What they need from him, and all they need from him, is consistently from 3-point shooting and get them 17 to 20 points a night. You get them 17 to 20 points a night off the bench, the Lakers can definitely hang with the Clippers in a 7-game series, and they can definitely win an NBA championship. But again, without that, I don't know how I see the Lakers beating the Clippers. And again, everyone likes to hype up J.R. Smith and Dion Waiters, and it was fun. The highlights are fun. J.R. Smith makes the no-look pass, Waiters Island does a crossover. Everything's great and good. In that Dallas scrimmage, everyone was like, oh my god, look at Dion Waiters, look at J.R. Smith, Gray Man Braun, look at all this. This looks fantastic. They're going to be great. They lost the freaking scrimmage game, people. J.R. Smith is not changing this team. He hasn't played in 2 years. He hasn't played. I know he's played these scrimmage games, but what is he going to look like against the Los Angeles Clippers? You don't think, I don't know who's going to be guarding. You don't think Patrick Beverley is going to clamp J.R. Smith or clamp Dion Waiters? And then who's going to be guarding them on the other end? You trust Dion Waiters or J.R. Smith on the defensive end of the court? Again, Lonzo Ball would have been such a better fit if you could go back in time. But Kyle Kuzma really needs this. Kyle Kuzma really needs to be that X factor. It'll be interesting to see. As well as I want to continue my conversation on who I believe is going to win the Western Conference playoff race. And another team I think is going to be a little bit of a surprise as well. I've said that the New Orleans Pelicans are going to win the playoff race and be that 8th team in the East. I'm going to double down and say I almost guarantee that that's going to be them. Zion Williamson is coming back. He's already back from the bubble. It just has to quarantine. So he's going to be ready for the NBA season. There were concerns after he had to leave for an urgent family matter. At the same time as well, Lonzo Ball is healthy, Brandon Ingram, all these guys. And also, there's not, the Grizzlies are kind of falling apart. I think some players are actually not going to be playing for them either. The only other team I give a legitimate shot to of making as that 8th seed in that play-in tournament to be in the Western Conference playoffs is the Portland Trail Blazers, and I want to talk about them for a few moments before I switch to an Eastern Conference team. The Damian Lillard I don't want to bet against is essentially where this is coming from. Now, CJ McCollum's a good player, but the fact they're getting Nurkic back fully healthy is a really interesting proposition. And Carmelo Anthony has lost a lot of weight and looks really good right now, actually. Can Carmelo be an efficient 3-point shooter? Don't need classic New York Melo. Hit the corner 3. Can Melo do that? Can Dame be Dame? Can CJ McCollum go off? And can Yusuf Nurkic provide those minutes that he was doing pre-horrific injury? Because if the Portland Trailblazers play like how they're supposed to play, with Dame Lillard getting 30 points a game, Carmelo just hitting those corner 3s and being a good, efficient 3-point shooter, Nurkic looking like a really good center, and then CJ McCollum obviously doing his thing as well, I would not put it past the Portland Trailblazers, who had a phenomenal playoffs last year, made it to the Western Conference Finals, I believe, to get all the way into that playoff spot over a team like the New Orleans Pelicans. Those are the only 2 teams I would give a shot to. Again, the Portland Trailblazers are an interesting story to see if they can make it in. I think it's going to be them or the Pelicans. I'm going to slightly edge out the Pelicans because of the Zion Williamson factor, and just because they were really on a roll going into the end of the season, or before, pre-hiatus, and the Portland Trailblazers weren't necessarily doing that great. But I really do believe it's down to those two teams. I don't trust the Grizzlies. I know they're already in that spot, but John Morant's a really awesome, fun, energetic player. He's going to win Rookie of the Year, but I think these teams like the Trailblazers and specifically the Pelicans just have more talent overall, to get into that final seed. The final team I want to talk about in the NBA playoffs, and it was my bold prediction team. I said that, the Celtics were going to make the NBA championship this year, but I said the Heat were going to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals and beat the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, I understand where that's controversial, but in the scrimmage, there's a player on the Miami Heat that people are not talking about right now. His name is Duncan Robinson, and he is the best three-point shooter who is playing in the bubble right now. He is one of the most efficient shooters in the league. He has the highest percentage 3 points on dribble handoffs and corner 3-pointers. He's not leading the league in NBA percentage, but he is leading if you take the volume of shots as well as NBA percentage. So who out of the players are shooting the most has the highest percentage? It's Duncan Robinson shooting almost 45% from three. He is an X factor for this entire, playlist, this entire, playlist of games, playlist of teams, right? He is the X factor in the playoffs. Because if he does what he did in the scrimmage and what he was doing at the end of the year, which is putting up 18 points a game for the Miami Heat and hitting between 6 and 9 threes every single game, then I really do believe the Heat are going to make the Eastern Conference Finals, and that's why I put them ahead of the Milwaukee Bucks, because I think they're a good matchup. There's one player who can seriously guard Giannis Antetokounmpo consistently, and that was Bam Adebayo. Kawhi Leonard kind of did it. LeBron James has kind of done it. There's one player that held Giannis to under 20 points. That was Bam freaking Adebayo. Combine him with Jimmy Butler, who is rested, who is healthy, who corrected his wrist, which he had surgery on top of Kendrick Nunn being back, on top of Tyler Hero being back, Myers Leonard, and Duncan Robinson. If he's hitting 6 3-points a game, you have to game plan for that. You have to game plan for it. He's not as good as Klay Thompson by any stretch of the imagination, but he plays exactly like him. No dribbling, constantly running around, tiring the defense out. You already have to worry about Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. If Duncan Robinson is putting 18 to 21 points a game for the Miami Heat in the bubble, they're going to make the Eastern Conference Finals. They're going to beat the Bucks in the second round of a 7-game series. So that's why I put them there. And again, Duncan Robinson's a fascinating player. Went from D3 Williams College in Massachusetts, then transferred to Michigan, was a senior there, undrafted, grinded in the G League with the Miami Heat, and now is one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA, and I truly believe he is the best shooter in the NBA bubble right now, considering Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are not playing. So it's a lot of fun to watch him and the Miami Heat. So those are just some of my thoughts on, the Lakers and some of the other teams in the bubble. Again, these scrimmage games are happening. So much fun to watch NBA basketball again, really consistently. Scrimmages going on almost each and every day. So much fun to watch. All right, we're going to take another quick break. On the other side of it, the NFL rookie class. I've talked a lot about Joe Burrow. What do I think about Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, and I'll get into a little bit of Joe Burrow too as well, and maybe even some Jalen Hurts. When do I think those three guys are going to play, and how good do I think they'll be for their teams? Going to be really interesting. I'll be talking about this rookie class coming up right after this break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I'm Alex Masserer. I am the host. Now, I just finished talking about the NBA, how Kyle Kuzma could be a potential Lakers X Factor, as well as how I believe the Portland Trailblazers and Miami Heat could finish two of the most interesting storylines in the team, under the radar teams, I believe, who could be completely fascinating and maybe change the entire landscape of the NBA playoffs. this season. I want to transition to football now and talk about the rookie class this year. Now, I talked at length about Joe Burrow, and I'll just recap my points quickly before moving on to the other 3 and maybe even 4 quarterbacks I want to talk about. I've talked about before how I think Joe Burrow could potentially struggle with the Cincinnati Bengals because of no fault of his own, similar to what happened to Carson Palmer. Again, the Cincinnati Bengals have never been a really stable, really well-run organization. On top of that, they are not a free agent destination. And on top of that, they are almost the worst, if not the second worst in their division at every single positional group outside of quarterback, maybe. And that's tough. They have the worst offensive line, worst defensive line. They definitely have the worst defense in the division, definitely have the worst tight end group in the division, worst offensive line in the division. I would probably argue maybe them or the Steelers have the worst running back core in the division. And with wide receivers as well, I think I would probably have to give either, again, the Steelers don't have the greatest wide receiver core, but again, they have Juju Smith-Schuster. I would probably solidify, depending on how AJ Green does, as the Bengals having the worst wide receiving group in their division as well. Not to mention in the division is Lamar Jackson, who's honestly the second or one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL, former MVP, and it doesn't look like the Baltimore Ravens are stopping or slowing down anytime soon. Again, I think they have the best roster in the league. On top of that, the Steelers are obviously a consistent winner. The opposite of the Bengals, a well-run organization. They make the playoffs almost each and every year. And again, they went 8-8 last season without Duncan Robinson. I just talked about him in the last segment. They went 8-8 last year without Ben Roethlisberger, with Duck Hodges as their quarterback. If I talked about this before, if Big Ben even returns to some semblance of what he's always been for the Steelers, then I think the Steelers are a legitimate playoff contender. On top of that, I really do believe the Cleveland Browns had a good hire in Kevin Stefanski. He would have been my choice as well. Him, again, with Nick Chubb, Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, David Njoku if he stays, Austin Hooper, 2 good tackles, 2 good defensive ends, 2 good corners, 2 good linebackers. The Browns are a legitimate team, and they might even be better than the Steelers. So it's hard for me to imagine how quickly, Joe Burrow could turn the Bengals around, if at all he could turn the Bengals around. Not to mention they definitely have the worst head coach in that division as well, with Zach Taylor, in my opinion, even though he's coached a year and Kevin Stefanski hasn't. So again, I've talked about this before, how I believe Joe Burrow might put up numbers, but could struggle, that Matt Stafford treatment, that Carson Palmer treatment, where you're just kind of stuck on a bad team, but you're a really good player, and you're doing everything you can to, improve them. But it's going to be really, really tough for Joe Burrow to consistently do that, in my opinion, in that division and everything like that. But let me transition now to the other NFL rookie quarterbacks and how I believe they will do. Now, the obvious one that people are going to compare Joe Burrow to the most is probably Tua Tagovailoa. If you remember, Tua Tagovailoa was probably supposed to be the number 1 overall pick if he didn't get hurt, and Joe Burrow didn't have his emergence as well. Those two combination of things really led Joe Burrow to leapfrog him, and Tua still went super high, went 5th to the Miami Dolphins, the team that always wanted him all along. Obviously, they were, allegedly tanking for him, everything like that. I want to think, and I really do believe this, that Tua Tagovailoa might have a better career success-wise than Joe Burrow. I don't know about statistically, because even if Joe Burrow doesn't, win games in Cincinnati because he's super talented, but they're not, giving him the right situation, that doesn't necessarily mean that, Joe Burrow will have a better statistical career than Tua Tagovailoa. There's a lot of players that have had really good statistical careers, but not a lot of wins, not a lot of championships, i.e. Matt Stafford, who has one of the best, careers so far at his age. I've talked about him before. In comparison to, some other players that were drafted in his draft and, have had some more success, a popular compare. Again, Aaron Rodgers, Alex Smith, things like that. All these guys, all these comparisons, you might have better stats, but you might have more success. Even if Tua doesn't have better stats with the Miami Dolphins than Joe Burrow does with the Cincinnati Bengals, I do believe at the end of the day, I think Tua Tagovailoa is going to have more wins. I don't know about championships or anything like that. Those are almost impossible to predict, because I think Tua Tagovailoa landed in a better situation than Joe Burrow did. Now, Joe Burrow landed again in a brutal division with the worst core almost at each and every position. They have the worst group in their division. Already, in the division with an MVP, Lamar Jackson, former 2-time Super Bowl champion, Ben Roethlisberger, and the Browns, who look like they're on the rise. So that is a really hard division to play with. Now switch gears to Tua Tagovailoa, right? Tua Tagovailoa is playing in a division with the New York Jets, who have never really been good, since almost Joe Namath, really, since their existence, with only a few short spurts. So on top of that, you have the Buffalo Bills, who until very recently have achieved success. And again, I don't trust the Bills. I don't trust Josh Allen. They have a great defense, though, don't get me wrong. And there's also the New England Patriots, which who knows exactly what they're going to be, given everything going on. I know Cam Newton is there now. Again, I believe it'll work at some fashion, at some level. But how much success is that? 10 wins, 8 wins? I've talked about it before. And who knows if Cam Newton's the long-term answer there in New England. So if you ask me, Tua Tagovailoa landed in a way better division than Joe Burrow did. I don't think anybody's going to argue that, the AFC North is maybe the best division in football outside of maybe the NFC West. On top of that, the AFC East might be the worst division in football, so that helps Tua Tagovailoa as well. I absolutely believe also that Tua landed with the better coach slash front office. Now, if you remember last year, the Dolphins were supposed to be the worst team in the league, and again, they were supposedly tanking for Tua. Instead, the Dolphins went 5-4 down the stretch, and Brian Flores made something out of nothing, and I think he's one of the better player development coaches in the NFL. Which is really interesting considering he's only been there 1 year, but he was turning guys who had been cut from other teams, undrafted free agents, into a potential, late push team that was really making some noise and again beat the New England Patriots with Tom Brady in Foxborough that last game of the year. Now, if you look at the Cincinnati Bengals coaching staff, the Bengals were not supposed to be the worst team in the league, and they have far more talent than the Dolphins did last year, yet the Bengals were the worst team in the league. So the Dolphins overperformed given their roster, or the Dolphins coaching staff, I should say, overperformed given everything, and the Bengals coaching staff underperformed. There's no reason for me to believe now that Joe Burrow is there and Tua Tagovailoa is there that that's going to change each head coaches, that the Zach Taylor is going to continue to underwhelm, and hopefully Brian Flores for Tua Tagovailoa is going to continue to overperform. Another factor in this as well is that Tua is not going to be rushed onto the court early on in his rookie season, specifically with everything going on with the coronavirus. Again, lack of practices, lack of reps. Joe Burrow, even though he's automatically the starter day one for the Cincinnati Bengals, isn't going to be getting the most amount of repetitions, practice throws with all of these guys, because again, the training camp's going to be so weird this year, and again, no preseason, so he's not even going to get live action game against other NFL competition until week 1 of his NFL career, which is absolutely crazy to me, and that's going to be really, really hard for Joe Burrow. Tua Tagovailoa, on the other hand, is in no pressure to start right away, not just given everything with his injury history, but the Dolphins already have a guy in Ryan Fitzpatrick who, again, went 5-4 down the stretch with Brian Flores, and who Flores is extremely comfortable with, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Tua Tagovailoa doesn't even start till, the earliest I see him starting is week 3 against the Jaguars, and the latest I see him starting is week 13 against the Bengals, ironically. So there's a whole gap there we don't even know when Tua's starting, and that's a positive thing for Tua, because he's not going to be thrown in right away before the offensive line gels up, before the receiving core, before everybody gets back in shape, knows what it's like against real NFL competition again, not just practices, until life essentially returns to quote-unquote normal, as normal as it can be for these players. Joe Burrow, again, is going to be thrown in his first game ever as a professional quarterback will be a game that counts, not a preseason game, not a game where he can, play a couple series, then sit, then learn to see his mistakes, right in there into the fire, which is going to be absolutely crazy to see. So I think that's an advantage for Tua. So again, I really do believe Tua Tagovailoa is going to get more wins in the long term and have more success. But statistically, I'm not sure. I don't know how that will be. But again, I also believe the Dolphins just have a better roster than the Bengals as well. I mean, one of the best secondaries in the league, in my opinion. 2 top 10 cornerbacks, Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, Kyle Van Noy this offseason, Emmanuel Ogbah, Shaq Lawson, redid the offensive line, redid the running back room, Jordan Howard, Matt Breida. Devontae Parker, I think, is a breakout receiver. Preston Williams is phenomenal as well. So the Dolphins obviously aren't ready yet to contend by any stretch of the imagination. They're a year or 2 away, but I think they're just in a better position than the Bengals are. Therefore, I think Tua Tagovailoa is in a better position than Joe Burrow is. Now let's get to Justin Herbert, who I've talked about a little bit on this show when I talked about last episode who's the best team in California, but I talked more about the Rams and the 49ers than I did the Chargers. Again, I don't think Justin Herbert is all that. I don't want to say that Justin Herbert will have a better career than Tua or Joe Burrow, because I don't think he will. But I do believe he landed in the best situation, if that helps. I think the best team that any rookie quarterback could have landed to this offseason was the Chargers. Their team was phenomenal. Again, I believe they have a Super Bowl roster, true number 1 receiver, in Keenan Allen, who hasn't either, for the Bengals, it's AJ Green, who hasn't played in a while, and Devontae Parker for the Dolphins just broke out. A consistent number 1 receiver is in Los Angeles, with Keenan Allen. Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, fantastic defense, especially with Joey Bosa. They're a really good all-around team, and I do like Anthony Lynn to some aspect as a head coach. Not to mention what is also going to help Justin Herbert is similar to Tua Tagovailoa. He's not going to have to go play week 1 right away. It'll be completely different for him as well. He'll start at some point whenever Tyrod Taylor kind of phases out. if at all this season. There could be another chance where that Justin Herbert doesn't play at all this year. I think he'll get the Drew Lock treatment and he'll play maybe the last 5 games of the year. Again, I like some aspects of Justin Herbert's game. I like his athletic ability. I love his size. I don't love his mechanics. I don't love his decision making. Again, I think he was overanalyzed though when it was coming to the draft process. A lot of people labeled him as already a bust before he could even play. I think Justin Herbert was definitely the 3rd best quarterback in this draft. I think it was Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, and a gap, though. I don't think he's up there with the other two, but there was a lot of Justin Herbert slander going on. I think he could develop nicely. He reminds me a lot of Josh Allen of Buffalo. I think if he could be a little bit more accurate version of Josh Allen, the Chargers could have hit a freaking home run, but I just don't know how that's going to play out, and who knows when he's really going to start playing. But again, the Justin Herbert pick isn't the worst pick in the world. Again, I just don't think he's got that true face of the franchise mentality and play style and really playing ability that Tua Tagovailoa and Joe Burrow have. So I think Tua Tagovailoa and Joe Burrow will be better in the long run than Justin Herbert. But it would not surprise me at all if Herbert is at least the starter for the Los Angeles Chargers for the next years in the future. I don't believe he's necessarily going to be a bust like some other players believe, some other people believe. I think he'll be better than that. Alright, finally, I want to talk about Jordan Love, who I've talked about a little bit. Now, Jordan Love is interesting because we're not going to see him for probably 2 seasons. He's definitely going to get the Aaron Rodgers treatment. Eventually he's going to replace Aaron Rodgers, which is the irony there. Again, I like him a lot. I think he might have the highest upside out of any quarterback in this class. Because I really do believe we have seen Joe Burrow at his best, right? We've seen how good he can be when everything is going right. We've seen Tua Tagovailoa, how good he can be when everything's going right. Again, a touchdown every 8 passes he threw. And to a certain extent, we've seen Justin Herbert when everything's going right, how he looks as well. They went to the Rose Bowl and they obviously won that. And when Justin Herbert was allowed to run a little bit more and be more of an athletic quarterback, it was a lot of fun to watch. So we've seen that as well. On top of all that, we don't know what Jordan Love is like at his best. We know what he's at his worst, and it wasn't actually all that bad. Now, 2 years under Aaron Rodgers, if he'll actually allow him to study under him, give him all the time he needs to really develop and be the quarterback he's supposed to be, he could be a really big boom quarterback in this league, and he's got that elastic arm that guys like Drew Lock, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes have that make them absolutely electrifying to watch. So it's going to be really interesting to see Jordan Love. I just don't have a lot of, things to say about him because, again, we're not going to see him for probably almost 2 seasons, if not more, when he eventually replaces Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. Those are my thoughts on the rookie quarterback class. Let me know what you guys think. We're going to take another quick break. On the other side of it, I'm going to do my way too early NFL award predictions. We're going to run through those quickly in about 5 minutes. I'm going to be giving you guys my way too early NFL award predictions, who I believe will be winning each major award in the NFL after this season. I'll get right into that after this break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
The GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am Alex Mashford. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know I said I was going to talk about some way too early NFL award predictions, but we actually have some breaking news in the NFL, and it's one of the biggest stories we've been talking about on this show. Jamal Adams has a new home, and this happened literally 30 seconds ago. Jamal Adams has been traded to the Seattle Seahawks, which is an incredible trade for them. A massive haul for the Jets, though. They get, so the Jets are sending Jamal Adams and a 4th rounder. And in return, the Jets are getting a 1st rounder, a 3rd rounder, and another 1st in 2022. And safety Bradley McDougald, who I believe was either the starting or backup safety for the Seahawks or a future replacement. Now, I don't say this a lot when it comes to the NFL, because NFL trades, when I view them, tend to be incredibly lopsided, specifically to the team that's ever getting the return in draft picks. Again, I remember when the Dolphins traded like Jarvis Landry for a 3rd and a 5th, even the Odell trade, things like that. So there's a lot of trades in the NFL that don't seem even or fair. This is one of the first trades I think I would consider as a win-win. To a certain extent, I still think the Jets come out as the loser because, again, less help for Sam Darnold, and I really feel bad for Sam Darnold. But I really like Joe Douglas, the new GM of the New York Jets, who comes from Philadelphia, who drafts well. I think they will draft well with these picks. Again, my issue with the Jets is Adam Gase, and I think he's the one who really drove Jamal Adams out. So for the Jets, I feel bad for Sam Darnold, but in the long run, Jamal Adams is a safety at the end of the day, and they're not winning anything anytime soon. He was their best player, but they got a really good haul. They were not like fleeced in any way, shape, or form. So they did get a decent haul. If Joe Douglas really has to nail on these draft picks, get Sam Darnold some help. You know, if Sam Darnold out of these picks gets a true number 1 receiver or a true number 1 left tackle, then you could really consider this trade a win. You got to see how the draft picks turn out. From a Seattle standpoint, you know I've pegged that Russell Wilson's going to win the MVP. I was going to talk about it, obviously, but not anymore. I think it's Seattle's year now. I really do. I think they're going to be a Super Bowl champion. I had it before because there were rumors of AB and Clowney. Those rumors are still on the table. To add Jamal Adams to this defense, the defense could really resemble one of a Legion of Boom. Will not be as good, but if Russell Wilson's working with a good defense, he's won a Super Bowl that way, and you know the offense is going to look really good this year. Again, I thought they were a Super Bowl contender before any of this. Adding Jamal Adams to me, the Seahawks are going to win this division. Russell Wilson's going to win the MVP. Absolutely awesome trade that just came through. Again, 2 first-round picks and a 3rd is a good haul for Jamal Adams. I love Jamal Adams, and I've talked about this on the show. He's the best blitzing safety. Again, a lot of people will say, oh, he's just a safety. He's more than that. He's almost like a defensive end, a linebacker. He's Mr. Everything. But at the end of the day, for the New York Jets, he wanted out, and the Jets weren't winning anything anytime soon. Build for the future. Get Sam Darnold some help via the draft, some cheap labor. I would consider this trade a win-win. If I had to pick a winner, I'm going to go with the Seahawks because I really do believe this just put them over the edge in their division and potentially made them a Super Bowl favorite again, along with the Kansas City Chiefs. Going to be absolutely awesome to see Jamal Adams in a Seattle Seahawk uniform. Man, the Seahawks have had such good secondary players over the years. Absolutely awesome. Going to be so much fun to watch. That is going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. Again, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you so much for listening. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on all social media platforms, and give us a 5-star review as well. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you all in the next episode.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.